everybody. Welcome to another episode of Real Impact, brought to you by Dr. Finesse, who helped name this bad boy. And we're very excited to have a name for this. And in this show, what we're going to be doing is doing a panel-style discussion, reviewing the films, discussing every aspect of it, something that has a mindset, lifestyle, just the way to approach your own life, how to live, aspect to it where we can mine for information. That's always going to be the bent to everything that we do here. But we are also just massive fans of filmmaking, TV shows, books, comic books, video games, all that stuff in general. So we're also going to spill over into those areas. We thank you so much for joining us and can't wait to hear what you guys think about this movie as well. And today we're going to be reviewing Only the Brave. Spoiler alert! All right, in this show, all we do is give spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, just go watch our review, which we'll link to right there somewhere. We're linking to that. Go check that out. Nice, brief, punchy. We'll tell you just a quick overview of whether or not we think you should see the movie. This is the deep dive, so be forewarned. There are going to be spoilers. As always, I'm your host, Tom Bilyeu, and I am joined by Dr. Finesse and Casey Files Elliott. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. I am super excited. I have a sense of where you are based on some of the themes you wanted to talk about, which are genius. I actually have no idea where your head's at.
Yeah,
so why don't we kick it off with you? Just at a high level, what was your vibe on this one?
I'll begin by saying my assessment probably won't be as great as hers because I just came from the theater.
Like literally.
Literally was racing here, saw the film. I'm probably still a little puff in the eyes. I'm an easy crier like Casey's dad.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Very easy. And I'm not one of those criers in the theater who just sits there and just goes and sniffs and stuff like that. I do that initially, but there's always that one quip that I have to catch. It's like, that's me every time.
Wow.
So that happened to me. I quipped on my way here. In general, yeah, I enjoyed the film. I mean, hey, it's entertainment. There was a point in the beginning where I thought, yeah, this film's not for me. Even going into it, I was like,
really?
Yeah.
What was it about it?
I think it was the writing. And I felt like they were there just to tell a story, a true story, but let's pepper it with some fun. Let's pepper it with some characters. How do we make this character stand out? Let's let him say something funny here and something funny there. And that's how I felt in the very beginning. In fact, the very first scene. But hey, it's entertainment. I loved how it looked. I loved the sound. I actually saw it in the Dolby Theater. It was my very first time in a Dolby Theater, especially the theater I went to with the comfortable chairs. I mean, wow. They reclined and everything. The sound was amazing. Great for a movie involving fire and air. Just to summarize it at the top, I enjoyed it. I cried, and I can't wait to dive in.
Nice. Mm-hmm. All right, Files. One thing that you said that really, really struck me is in the movie, there's this recurring imagery of the burning bear. Mm-hmm. And one of the main characters, Eric, talks about how when he was watching it, he said it was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And that's really, I think, I'm in total agreement with you, maybe my main takeaway from the film, which is that life should be both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. What do you think about that and how it's talked about in the movie and like bring it to real life as well? In what way have you had a life or not had a life that you think is both beautiful and terrifying?
I think it's central to the theme in the film, obviously, and specifically to Eric. We sort of have two protagonists. Yeah. Eric, played by Josh Brolin. He's sort of the leader of this hotshot fireman group unit, and struggling, particularly in relation to his relationship with his wife, but how much he risks his life every day to do this job. But it's clear that he loves it so much, and he's so passionate about what he's doing, about the good that he's doing, about saving people's homes, and also like establishing that brotherhood with his team and helping other men grow into the men that they should be, et cetera, being a mentor, that the sacrifice is, I guess, worth it for him. And I think he has this reoccurring dream of this bear on fire that in the movie, he says this actually happened in real life to him. He was fighting a fire, and he saw a bear come out of the flames partially lit, and it's sort of stuck with him forever. because it was both beautiful and terrifying. And that's just how he also lives his life. Doing this job is beautiful, but also terrifying. And actually, also, I think the filmmaker tried to establish that mood for the whole film. I'm sure you noticed the like sweeping vista shots of the landscape and then cutting to like the fire. And so it's like beautiful, beautiful footage and then danger. So that was clearly a theme that they wanted to get across. And so, I mean, I think they did a great job.
You know, it's funny, real quick, I made one note the entire film. One note the entire film, because I hate pulling out my phone. If I had a little notebook, I hate doing that. I really pulled out my notes and I was like, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And then I was like, oh, I wish the movie was called Bear on Fire, which is true. I really wish the movie was called Bear on Fire. I would have run with that. And then if you would have seen it when that came up, you'd be like, that's what it's about. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. So, yeah, I love that. I love that.
Now, what is it, though, about that that's meaningful?
Beautiful and terrifying at the same time?
Yeah.
Well, I want to resonate with what she said. I mean, what she said is spot on. And I think they did a good job capturing it. There's something, I'm going to say two things about that to answer you. There's something about fire that's beautiful in the way it works and the way it moves. I don't fully understand it. I've read up on it before. Every time there's a fire, they explain it. When I saw Backdraft, that helped me understand that fires can do some tricky things. So, but it's beautiful. Like if you look at fire, if you're not in the danger of fire, fire could be so beautiful. You think of, the elements of fire and, stories that involve fire, like the phoenix rising from the fire. That stuff's beautiful, but the terrifying part is it can kill you and burn you and choke you out. So there's that, and then the theme itself of beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The reason I wrote that down is there was a point, and God, I feel like I talk about this a lot anytime I'm talking with you or whatever, or in general, because it's still part of my grief. My mom passed away in 2008, and I still talk about it because it's still a part of my grieving process. And one of the things a story that I always tell is one thing I learned about passing away. It's something I rarely talk about. And it's having to see my mom wither away from cancer was really tough. And one of the things that happened was when she actually passed away, my brother and I, we weren't in the room. And my dad was in the room. And I remember when it happened, when I came back to the hospice, I was so upset that happened, that I missed the moment, that I wasn't there for her. And just even for myself, that I missed it. And then I started reading up on grief more and more and talking to other people who had gone through it. And one thing that I found out about the dying a lot of times is, and even she wasn't even that coherent, but a lot of times they understand how awful it is for the person that's being left behind. Because the people who go, they're fine, but the people left behind have to struggle with it. And they actually are pretty choosy about who they die in front of. It's one thing that I've read. It happens time and time again, especially if it's a parent. If it's a mother especially, they wait for their kids to come and see them and say goodbye if they're not around, but they wait until they're not around, and they either do it in their sleep or they do it when they're alone in the room.
Wow.
My mom chose to do it when it was just my father. And let me tell you, when I read up on that, and then when I was in grief counseling, because I was in a group grief counseling, and that was a story that went across the room. So many people had gone through that. And to me, understanding it, took me a while to understand it, but once it hit me and I understood it, I remember thinking that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, or beautiful and sad at the same time. It's a juxtaposition that I always bring up. So literally when he said that in the film, I thought of that moment, and I was like, oh, I got to leave my only note in the film. So that's why it really resonated with me.
That's really interesting. One of the things that hit me along this notion is that life should be beautiful and terrifying. Not just that it is, but that it should be that way. And the fact that it's tied to fire to me is really, really fascinating, because fire is both deadly and life-giving. And by life-giving, from a forest perspective, there are certain seeds that the pine cones and stuff, that will only open if they've gone through a fire, so that the seeds lay dormant until they know, okay, this has been cleared and we're going to need to have this rebirth. So being born from the ashes of a fire is a literal thing, right? Wow. So that's how that finds its way into mythology and becomes these things about humans, where we grab onto that notion of that something post-destruction, new, and usually in the mythology, better, cleaner, stronger, more resilient is the thing that rises up, right? And so I saw that in the movie, which brings in some of the other thematics about both the main character, Eric, and the second main lead, played by Miles Teller, whose name I'm forgetting right now. Brendan, thank
Donut.
you. Donut, yes.
AKA
They both fight their addiction by going into this insanely difficult job, which is the only thing that gives them enough pride and a big enough emotional high to override what's going on in their lives of addiction, where it's that just amazing roller coaster, right? The one thing addiction does have going for it, it has massive highs. Now it has horrific lows, but it has the highs, and normally people can't match it. So something that is so dangerous, so high risk, so when you win big, and you save towns, and you save a 2,000-year-old tree and all of that. And so like that's something to the human experience that I think people really need to explore for themselves, to understand like what in your life takes you to those levels, right? Like when people ask me why I want to play on a world stage, why I want to do things at scale, why it's not enough for me just to help one person, that's the answer. You need something big, you need something terrifying, you need something that scares the shit out of you, and then you overcome it to really have that moment. Also, just the fire as analogy for the failure that you think is going to kill you, but you actually rise up stronger out of it. But then literally going back to, because I said there were multiple ways that the metaphor works, one being the literal regrowing of the plants, but the other, the metaphorical, or not metaphorical, sorry, but a little harder to think of, is that it was fire that allowed us to cook the food, which allowed the nutrients to be more readily absorbed, which allowed us to grow a bigger brain and feed its energy requirements and shorten the digestive tract. And so like all of these things that ultimately allow us to become human, to be as flexible as we are, to have the size brain that we have, is because we learned to harness the fire. But thinking of those tools that you harness as being both the beautiful gift and the horrifying thing that can ultimately end everything, was really, really interesting. So that's one level that you can take it in terms of how does it impact me as just like an average human. But then in the movie, I actually think the bear stands for exactly one thing, and that is ambition. And when you think about what ultimately drives the main character, Eric, is he wants to become a hotshot, right?
Yep.
It's safer to be a number two, but that's not where his ambition lies. Everyone in the crew, they become like one of the best crews. What he taps into to get everybody to work so hard is wanting to be great, having the ambition to be more than they are. But that comes at a price. And this has really been on my mind lately. So it's like, part of that is why I was because honestly, as a movie, I think it's only okay. And we'll get into that in a minute. And this is why I wanted to do this show, is sometimes on the surface, something is only okay. But as you dive deeper into what you can learn about it for your own life, it can be very powerful. Now, I think there's things in here that are really powerful for people to extract. But cinematically, especially coming off of Blade Runner 2049, I was mortified. I really was left wanting. But the burning bear as the metaphor for ambition, and how there is this beautiful quest that you're on when you're trying to build something gigantic, when you're going after, in the movie they talk about it, doing something that's never been done is hard, right? So you have these characters that are driven by their ambition. They move away from their addiction because there's something that gets them newly excited. They accomplish something no one else has done. They save things, heightened risks, but it begins to, both main characters are struggling with their family life. And I think about this a lot with impact theory. It's like and this has happened twice in my marriage, where I became so obsessed with what I was building that you begin to lose touch with everything else. And seeing that beautiful imagery of, the bear dies, right? It doesn't run off into the plane to go on to live a better life. It runs off as this most beautiful thing that is tempting to just be lost in the beauty and not see the danger, right? So that to me is very interesting because I think, and look, these guys pay the ultimate price for their ambition, all but one. They pay the ultimate price for their ambition. So if I had to reach inside the writer director's mind, this is a meditation on not just family, both the one that you have and the one that you choose, but I think really deeply at its core is a meditation on ambition and the price you pay for it.
Do you think that they end with an opinion on that? Because I still feel very conflicted if I think about the movie itself. What the team did in real life was outstanding. The work they did was amazing. I'm like so thankful that we have people that want to run into fire instead of away from it to protect the rest of us. But I've found it interesting to think about, was it worth it to Eric what he did? Because him and his wife, Amanda, thank you, sort of have a bubbling argument about that comes to a crescendo at the very end of the film. In the beginning, she's very encouraging towards his career. She wants him to succeed. But as it becomes more dangerous, as she starts to feel more alone, that becomes a bigger problem for her. And do we think that the movie has a stance on whether that ambition was the right choice?
Well, the motherfuckers die in the movie, so I think that. But
for
honestly,
a good cause?
Yes, for sure, and they're clearly heroes. Only the brave is the title. But I think that there's no question the people behind this feel in their own lives that they have paid an extraordinary price for whatever it is that they're trying to do. That seems pretty evident from the telling the story of the bear, from recognizing both that it's beautiful and terrifying, from the way that the characters move from idyllic when the ambition is exciting but hasn't yet drained the relationship, to then he gets the success that he wants, but it only pulls him farther away from like his core, which is his relationship. And then in the end, he loses everything because of it, but she isn't embittered by that moment. She goes to his proxy because she keeps saying, you guys are more alike than you think. And so she wants him at the end to know, like, he would be glad that you're alive. You should be glad that you're alive, right? There's no sense of like, fuck you for surviving and like he died and, you know, and I just want him back. So I think that from that perspective, they played it well because I don't think there is a right answer. I don't think if you give like a Pollyanna Disney ending where it's like ambition is bad, family good, or ambition good, family bad, like you're really doing the discussion a disservice because the truth is you pay a price for your ambition and it is both amazing and what you accomplish and are able to do and where you're able to play is incredible, but you're playing a dangerous, I mean, literally, I wanted to say this with no irony, you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I feel that in my own life. Like building Quest, I was playing with fire. Building Impact Theory, I was playing with fire. Because I'm always like walking this fine line of it takes so much of my time and energy that it gets very close to dethroning my wife in anything other than rhetoric, right? You'll never hear me say anything other than she's the most important thing in my life. But then if you just clock the hours that I spend, right? I spend so much time building it and building it and building it that you are playing with fire. And so now, like from a relationship perspective, I think about like, what is the lesson in the movie, right? Like, what is that line that is the metaphorical equivalent of death, right? Divorce, you see it all the time. Did you guys I know you saw the Defiant Ones. Did you see the Defiant Ones, the documentary? Oh my God, watch it. So Jimmy Iovine, who, by the way, Jimmy, since I know you're watching this, we want to get you on the show on Impact Theory, the main show. And in that, we're going to talk about how one's ambition can completely consume you.
Yeah.
And because he went 3 divorces?
3.
So, and every time saying that, oh, the only way that I know how to deal with my own fear, the only way that I know how to deal with being, having this goal and trying to attain it is just to go harder on my work, to become obsessed. And he was like, I wish I could see a therapist, but
Yeah,
what works for me is
ambition can definitely derail you. The central theme I took away from this, and it has a lot to do with what we were touching on, is I should say, bravery. And it's kind of on the nose because it's called Only the Brave. But bravery was the central theme I took away from this. To an obvious standpoint, firemen fighting fires, you have to be brave to fight fires and to put yourself in the line of fire, so to speak. But also, just the whole thing we talk about with ambition and putting your loved ones second and putting what you're doing and your addiction first. So, for one, he had an addiction. Eric had an addiction. Brendan, a.k.a. Donut, had an addiction. Overcoming any type of addiction or going through any type of addiction takes a hell of a lot of bravery. Being in a relationship and having to choose between your ambition and your loved one takes a hell of a lot of bravery to even try to balance that. It's a lot of bravery. And there was a moment in the film, there is a moment in the film that really got me. And again, like I said, I'm a sap. And I almost quipped when Eric and Amanda have the blowout about her saying, I want to have a child. And they're screaming at each other. And he goes, you knew what you got into. I said from the top that I didn't want a family. I just need you. This is it. And I have my work. It's a conversation I've witnessed a million times. Something that I've even thought of a million times. But one thing that people fail to recognize and realize when you go into a relationship, when you go into life, naturally, you are going to change. The course is going to change. I hear people say it all the time, like, that's not the woman I fell in love with. That's not the man I fell in love with. Yeah, it's not, because they changed. No one stays the same. Now, the trick and the bravery it takes to get through that, to navigate those choppy waters is to understand that this person's going to change, you're going to change, and you're going to have to ride that tide together and compromise. So there's a lot of bravery there. Now, the quipping moment for me is when he went back and he goes and talks to the fire chief, played by Jeff Bridges, Dwayne, and he comes back home to his wife, and he kneels to her. She's crying on the bed. You can tell she's been crying all night. You can tell it's dawn. The sun's coming up. And he says, I'm yours. Now, to me, that takes a hell of a lot of bravery to give in to something that you were so adamant about not doing. I said this from the top. I don't want to have a family. It gets in the way of my ambition. It gets in the way of, it gets in my head because this is what I do. If I'm going to go out and fight fires, I can't know that there's someone, a young one, waiting for me. So that's what I took away from there, bravery in all aspects of the film.
Yeah, I dig that. Their relationship to me was really interesting and definitely felt really real in that when she says, yes, I changed, you changed me, I let you in, I was like, wow, that's actually a really great way to explain it, because like normally, I'm like, the words that I'll use to explain it is you have to learn to grow together, right? And of course you're going to change. And I always quote the Jay-Z line, you think I work this hard to stay the same, right? So people are pushing themselves. I mean, a certain type of person, not everybody, but most people are pushing themselves. They're trying to get better. They're trying to improve. So of course you're going to be changing. You have to find a way to really be growing together. Like you were saying, navigate those waters. But for her to point out the obvious fact that this very relationship was bound to change me if I lower my defenses and I really let you in. And if I don't do that, if I'm not opening myself up to you, if I'm not seeing the world differently because now we're together, it's like that is in and of itself a shame. So that was really important. That's something I hope people really hear in the movie is when you're in a relationship like that, if they're not changing you, if being in that relationship doesn't make you a fundamentally different person, like something's wrong. Like people always ask me, like, who's had the biggest impact on you? And usually they phrase it like, as an entrepreneur, who's had the biggest impact on you? And the answer is my wife. And the answer is my wife because being in a relationship with her has changed me fundamentally as a human being, so much more than any book or mentor or anything like that could ever hope to do. So yeah, that was a pretty cool moment. Now, what did you guys think of how Miles Teller, aka Donut, his character, is able to propel himself out of addiction and finally like buckle down and do something great once he has a daughter?
That was a huge thing for me. It's funny. I have a son, 4.5-year-old, and I have to say it's definitely changed my whole outlook on life. Not that I was irresponsible and doing drugs and wanted to get sober. That had nothing to do with it, but just in general, suddenly you have an extra thing to live for. I think people who don't have children, one thing that they overlook is that you genuinely, when you make something yourself, you and someone else, and yeah, of course, if you adopt, I'm sure it's the same thing. You love someone you're taking care of. You want everything for them. You want the world to be beautiful for them, and for that reason, it becomes really important for you to change. Not to change and say, "Oh, I have to change," but to be ready to change, to be willing to adapt to the roller coaster. Because once kids are thrown into your life, man, it is a roller coaster. I mean, a roller coaster of sicknesses, a roller coaster of poop and pee and spit, a roller coaster of, it changes the dynamic of your relationship. So seeing that being the catalyst for him to change was huge.
So how did you read that relationship, given that you don't have kids?
Oh, yeah. So I felt like when I first saw it, it felt like a really sudden decision for Miles Teller's character to make. We see him as so out of sorts with himself. He's really a loser is how they present him at the beginning. And Miles Teller does give, I thought, a really amazing performance of taking you from the state where he starts and then his growth throughout the film. But it happens so quickly, and of course you kind of need it. Do you need him to join the fire crew? But that decision, it's sort of a snap judgment he makes once he finds out he's going to have a kid. And so for me, that was tough to, I guess, accept, just because I haven't had that experience. But I went and read the article that the film is actually based on, which is a GQ article called No Exit by Sean Flynn, which just covered the real events of what happened.
Sean Flynn's the guy that actually lives, right?
No, he's the journalist that wrote the article. The names are actually accurate. Brendan, played by Miles Teller, is the real guy who lives.
Brendan McDonough.
What's that?
Brendan McDonough.
That's right. That's where the donut, I think,
Yes.
came from. But so in that, they go into detail about how he really was inspired by the birth of his daughter to change his life around. And I don't know, something about that realness of hearing that made me realize, I'm judging this from like a very personal perspective, just not having that experience. So that's basically my point.
What's really interesting to me is, so working with so many employees at Quest, and a lot of them in the inner cities, there was a lot of like, I didn't plan to have a family, but now, I got somebody pregnant. And you would see guys that had grown up pretty hard make pretty big switches really fast because they want to take care of their family. Now, that's very different, though, than being able to sustain it over the long run. I'd be interested to see, like, how many people make that initial change, because there's that burst of like, I want to protect this child and take care of them, and then how many go through the nightmares of dirty diapers, stress with the potential ex. Like, this is a pretty complicated relationship in this, because they're not married, they're not even in a relationship, but they do share at least occasional custody of the child, and so there's so many complications that can go along with that. I wonder, like, what the sort of statistical fallout rate is for that. Like, do people stay that engaged for the long run, or is that something that creates this like initial momentum? Because to me, that would be fascinating if that really does create lifelong alterations to behavior.
Well, and I think what's interesting is it wasn't so he's going to have a child. That's sort of the spark to his ambition. But it feels like he didn't just go get a job or quit smoking pot. He decided to do one of the most difficult jobs you could ever have, to put himself in danger, to like train. He was completely out of shape before he joined, at least the way the film presents it. So there's something to that, I think, that maybe makes it stick for him.
So you're bringing up one of the biggest misses in the film for me. So it was so weird when the kid before him is like, oh, I'm the son of a firefighter, interviewing. I'm the son of a firefighter. They're asking him all these questions. They ask him, like, do you know the difference between this and this? and the guy is explaining it, but actually doesn't seem very confident. And so then this loser kid who, like, moments before you see stealing like a TomTom from somebody's car, and he comes in and he was like, do you know the difference between this and he's like, yeah, actually, and gives this awesome answer. And I'm like, since when is this fucking kid like a genius about firefighting? So I really felt out of sorts in that. I felt that should have been something that they covered. Like, you need to tell me that this guy was on a path. He went to EMT school, but you don't find that out till later. So it's like, he obviously tried to do things before, failed at them, having a little more context around like why his mom thinks he's such a loser. Because you just assume he's been smoking pot since high school, right? And so he's been fucking around, not doing anything in his life. So when he goes in there, it was like, literally for me, like discovering, oh, how convenient in this movie about ninjas, this guy happens to have been like a world-class, martial artist. That's how it felt. I was like, this fucking kid happens to be like really knowledgeable about firefighting. And look, I knew it was inspired by true events, but it's still, you have to tell the story, right? And so I felt like dropped in the middle of something because I bought into him as a loser. You're very right. Like, they portrayed that really, really well, really simply, very rapidly. You get what a dumbass this kid is, down to how easily he gets caught. Like, he's just so unaware. Drugs are obviously involved. And so it's like, all right, this guy's a bit of a bonehead. But when it became, he's like a fireman savant who's out of shape, but like a fireman savant nonetheless, I was like, like, I needed more on that.
I guess to me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just I totally agree from a plot hole perspective. In general, it felt like he had to put himself in that dramatic of a situation to actually start that change. That's sort of how I read it. Like,
I love that, and I totally buy that.
He couldn't be like, oh, I'm going to go get a job at a bank, or, oh, I'm going to like go back to school.
Getting the job that he got, like 100%. Like, just from a reality of being a human perspective, it would need to be something dramatic like that for him to really make that kind of massive change. Also, if you're an addict doing something, let me tell you right now, in fact, dear audience, lean in. If you want to make a real change like that in your life, it's got to be something that's physically demanding. He's got to go through the physical transformation first so that he really begins to feel internally, not even emotionally, feel internally better about himself because he's doing something hard. He's getting results. To be in a group where the peer pressure is unbelievable, where when you fuck up, people are on your ass. And he tells him, like, he does the quiz, right? When they're doing, they just march to the top of the mountain. He quizzes him. He gets the answer wrong. He makes the whole team do push-ups because the one guy got the answer wrong. And he tells him, like, if you fuck this up again, I'm going to choke you out. And I remember thinking, like, because he's essentially the boss. Eric is the boss. And when the boss, which you would never get in a normal setting, can say in all fucking seriousness, if you miss this again because lives are actually on the line, I will fucking choke you out. I thought, no one wants to hear that. That is so un-PC, but god damn it. That's how you get results. Like, that's how you're going to whip these guys into shape. And secret on secrets here, back at Quest, when it was just production and it was me and a bunch of former drug dealers, gang members, like, running the line, you got to be fucking tough. Like, there was no, like, HR would have had a fucking stroke with the way that I talk to people. Now, you can get away with that just like Eric does, because in this photo, in fact, let me pull this photo up. In this photo, who's fucking in front? It's Eric, right? In fact, this is the very moment where he says, if you, come on, clicking on it, not going, doesn't want to go. All right, but you get, there it is, that moment where he says, I'm going to fucking choke you out face to face, right? There's no one around to stop him. He knows, like, no, for real, like, I will actually choke you out. And this is the guy that fucking smashes a chair on a table. I mean, he's got that kind of personality, that really fiery personality. But that's how you whip these guys into shape. That's why these guys become so badass, because there is so much internal peer pressure to not fuck up.
Yeah, and even to do that job, I mean, that's one thing that you learn too. A lot of people who are battling an addiction, they actually live a dangerous life, so they tend to do very dangerous things. And they get into jobs like this. I mean, that's one thing that you read about all the time. And my wife's surgeon, my wife just had back surgery, and her surgeon does crazy things like skydiving, bungee jumping, parasailing, plays basketball on the weekends. To me, that's probably the most dangerous thing because he uses his hands.
He swims with sharks.
Exactly.
He fucking juggles chainsaws and plays basketball.
But actually,
What a
out of
lunatic.
everything that I heard that he does, I was just like, wait, what? He plays basketball? Those hands, that's his life. That's his skill. He can't break those fingers. He can't jam his fingers. So, I mean, even when I hear about guitarists playing basketball, it freaks me out. But that's what he does. And I remember finding this out about him in one of our many appointments with him. I had mentioned it. I was like, I hear you do these crazy things. And he talked about the nature of addictive behavior and how a lot of surgeons are daredevils because they're living a life where they have people's lives in their hands. They see death all the time. They see malpractice here and there. There's a threat of malpractice. There's that looming possibility that someone may die in their hands. They're doing crazy things. So they tend to have this very addictive, thrill-seeking behavior. And on the other side of that, people who have an addiction, I mean, you can read about it. You hear that they do crazy things once they get straight. Like things that the common person wouldn't do because they've seen the dark side. So they're going to dive right in. So for me, I thought that was great. Seeing that, I didn't think much about it. I figured I was like, here's a guy who's battling addiction, to your point, needed to do something that was going to change him. And in order to change, he had to dive into something deep and life-changing and heavy and strenuous and something that was going to push him to the absolute limit. That's how I saw it. And so, I mean, I didn't think too much about it. And then actually time did pass between the time that he found out that she was pregnant and the time that he actually committed to this. Because if you can recall, she was 5 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. And then it jumped ahead. The baby was like a toddler. You know what I mean? Or maybe like 1 year old. And they were just getting going in the fire academy. Or not the academy, but you know what I mean? So time did pass. So, yeah, they jumped ahead, but they didn't just leave a wide open hole. You know what I mean? For a movie that's 2 hours and 15 minutes, I thank the Lord, if you're up there or there, if it's a Wookiee, I don't care who it is, that they didn't elaborate on his change. It would have been nice, but man, for 2 hours and 15 minutes, like, you've lost me unless you're Star Wars.
Because you're saying that's long.
That's long. Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, I used to be like, or a teenager or in college, please make this movie over 2 hours. If I'm paying this much for this movie, I need to get all of it.
That's interesting.
Now it's like, if I'm paying this much for this movie, I want like an 80s movie time frame, 90 minutes.
Y'all better wrap this up in an hour and a half, motherfucker.
What?
Yeah.
Why is it still going? So, yeah.
I had slight heart palpitations when I saw that 2049, Blade Runner 2049 was 2 hours and 44 minutes. Mm-hmm. I was like, God damn. But in fact, and this is going to be our transition into how this movie was told versus like all the thematic stuff, just how it was executed. So coming off Blade Runner 2049, which by the way, if you haven't watched it, be sure to watch that. It was our initial panel review. And that movie blew me away. And it's becoming rapidly known as the best movie that nobody's watching. Do yourself a favor. If you like cinema, watch that movie. It I think is probably the best sequel of all time. And yes, I know that Godfather 2 is a sequel. It's definitely better than that. And then, let's get some outrage in those fucking comments. So I definitely think it's better than that. And it may be the best film I've seen in the last 10 years. Now, I talked about in the review, like, I need to be very careful because I haven't done, like, an actual audit of all the movies I've seen in the last 10 years. But, like, it really, really hit me. And it hit me because it was a great story, very, very, very well told, that used the art and the technique of cinema, sound design, score, everything, acting, all of it, editing, brought it all together into one package that took me on an emotional journey as well as an intellectual journey. Now, this film to me left me wanting in a big way. In fact, the frame that's up right now on the TV explains exactly what I hate about this movie. That frame shows me nothing. There's nothing about it other than like we're capturing what's really there. They're actually out in the woods. It's actually, lit through, I'm sure they've got screens and stuff, but for the most part, it's just fucking sunlight. Mm-hmm. But because of that, you're not commenting on anything in the film. Now, think about, on the other hand, the way that they captured the flaming bear, right? They didn't make it real. So it's totally subjective. Mm-hmm. They made it as beautiful as they could to bring out the subjective experience of his terrifying and beautiful at the same time. It's done in a dreamlike state. And did you guys catch that when he tells the story, you never see the bear?
Yeah.
So you only see the bear in like these flashes leading up to it where you have no context. Now, if you've seen the fucking trailer, you knew exactly what it was. I kind of wish with this one that I hadn't had the context.
Did they
to
give
know
that
how it
away in
would
the trailer
play.
too?
Yeah.
Man, this is why I don't watch trailers.
So I had the context going into it. I knew that the bear was the thing that was beautiful and terrifying, but I thought that when he would tell the story, because that's how it plays in the trailer, is he's talking about it and you see it. So in fact, I think one of the trailers is essentially him giving the narration about the bear and you're seeing the bear and all that. So, and honestly, that's the film I want to see. I want to see the film that's shot like that. I want to see the film that's deeply subjective. I want to see the film that turns the fire into a ballet, that it turns it into both a monster that's capable of transfixing beauty and then just death, right? Like, I'll give you some crazy shit they should have done. So they showed like a wolf carcass, right? And it's like a boot goes by and you see it for a second. Fucking open on that, man. Like in some beautiful shot, like the sun is just coming up. There's just enough light. And one of them, Miles, right, is sitting there and he's just looking at the charred remains of this animal and it's smoking and even the smoke is beautiful. You know what I mean? And you get like, you paint onto it what you think that means, right? Giving me that chance to really go like, what the fuck does this mean? And like, let's get really film theory-y here for a second. You guys know Eisenstein, the director, The Steps at Odessa. Eisenstein, he was Russian or German, I forget. I think he's Russian. Anyway, he did this famous film called The Steps of Odessa. It was The Steps of Odessa sequence. The name of the movie was The Battleship Potemkin.
Okay.
So absolutely horrific. Do not watch it. So painful for a modern audience. But like when it came out, I'm sure it'd be pretty amazing. And one of the things they did was they would show this guy's blank face and then they would cut to like a casket. And blank face, casket, always sad. But then people did things later to show, well, you could do that same blank face and show like food, always hungry, right? So, but it's the same fucking face.
Yeah.
And you're just cutting to something different. But that allows the audience to really engage and like be there and pour themselves into the film. And because there was nothing like that, it was almost shot like, I'm just trying to document this. And I bet if you had asked them, the filmmaker would have said, I just want to document this. Right? I don't want to make it something it's not. These guys are already heroes. I just want to show it. But to me, like, while I get it, then you've got to go all the way, like, fucking film this like Cops. Because I didn't get the sense of what it would really be like to be in that with him, right? So if you're going what I'll call cinema verite, which is actually different. Cinema verite is where you go and fucking shoot it on a real street and people are looking at the camera like, what the fuck? But like, if you want me to feel like I am actually there, then I need to be confused like Donut's character, right? When he's there. I need to like really feel his sense of exhaustion when he's there. But I'm actually not with him as he's struggling. I'm with the other characters who are like, do you think you made it? So it's like there's an economy of storytelling here, which is fine, but 1,000 missed opportunities to make this a great movie.
See, I saw that differently. I mean, and I get your point. I would have loved it. I would love to see it like shot beautifully and like they did with the bear, but I almost feel like it's almost a respect thing. Maybe it was a choice. Like this is the story about the biggest casualty of firemen next to 9/11. Let's either have a happy medium or let's not go overboard with it. Let's not turn this into an action film like Backdraft. Let's not dumb this down either. Let's make this about, family. That was a huge theme in the film. So maybe they were thinking, okay, this is someone in Cincinnati, Ohio, who likes to cry during movies and has a daughter named Casey Elliott. Probably just wants to see a film about people doing heroic things and what the consequence is when it comes to their family. That's how I saw it. And I mean, but of course, and again, like going back to the way it was shot, I actually saw a lot of beauty in it outside of the flaming bear. I kept thinking as it was going on, like, man, I mean, there was a moment while I was watching the film where I thought, man, like these filmmakers are really doing a good job faking a fire. Like, obviously, this is a real fire that they're shooting, but how did they do that without risking burning down a forest? That's what I want to look into. Mm-hmm. That's where my mind went. I was like, wow, this is amazing. These filmmakers faked a forest fire. How do you do that? If anyone has an answer for that, please tell me. But so to me, that was beautiful. And it also put me in a place where I was like, oh, I was feeling hot, although I was in a cold theater. Because people always overlook, how dangerous fires are. A lot of people don't even realize that most people who die in fires die from the smoke. And I felt like they fully captured that. Like, think about how hot fires are. Like when you're at a Vegas show, for example, and you're watching the magician on stage, and those magicians always have the flame of fire, and everyone's like, whoa! Everyone does that not because it's bright, because you're like in the nosebleeds, and all of a sudden you got beads of sweat in your head. Yeah. And you're like, damn, that guy's on stage next to that flame. How's he okay with this? I'm sweating. So I think about stuff like that. I'm like, man, that fire's hot. Or like my mom used to cook, and she was good at it, but grease would be popping off the pan and hitting her arm, and she's just sitting there like she's fine. But stand next to a pan, and when grease pops off and one little speckle hits your arm, you're like, ah! But these guys go in there with bravery, and they're standing next to the fire. So that thought was going through my head the entire time. So there's a point towards the end of the film when the fire is moving really fast. Another beautiful thing that I thought was captured in this film. With the Santa Rosa fires that was just going on in upstate California, they kept reiterating what we always hear every time there's a fire. Evacuate your house. Don't stick around and wait too long to get out of there, because fire moves fast. Something you always hear. And I feel like you hear that, but you really don't see that in film. In this film, first of all, you hear the guy on the radio saying the fire is moving 50 miles per hour. And you see, they were standing right next to the safety zone, but the fire was moving way too fast for them to get there. Mm-hmm. And I thought the director did an amazing job of catching the velocity of that sweeping fire. So, I mean, that's how I thought about the vision of the film.
Kind of to go off of that, it's sort of in between both of your opinions, because I felt like they made a lot of generic, conventional choices that made it feel run-of-the-mill at times. But the accuracy of the final fire, and this is, again, I went and read some information about how it really went down, was so on point. And when I was watching it, I felt that. I felt like this is what happened, for as much as they know, because obviously only the men were there. But the radioing was down to what he literally said on the radio back to the guy before the fire overcame them. And that fire happened in an hour. Like, I think the time was 4 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, they were all dead.
Jeez.
And so I felt that suddenness and I don't know, I kind of felt like not what it would have felt like to be them, but I don't know, I just felt the realism of that part really, really stood out. But I do think, I'm kind of torn on my opinion. They were tied, I think their hands were kind of tied behind their backs to make sure that they were really accurate in a lot of places, and that did hold them back from a filmmaking perspective. But I think it was perhaps something about these are these real men, and we don't want to do anything that is not true to their real life. I could feel that in the movie. And it came down to, they did cast different people. Like every actor that played a man who actually died in real life, they showed in the credits. Mm-hmm. Like they made sure to give respect to all the men. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, it's tough. I'm not sure what I would have done if I was in charge of the film for this kind of subject matter. But I also think that, like I said, there were a lot of generic choices made. Taylor Kitsch's character, who I love from Friday Night Lights, calling out to all my Friday Night Lights fans.
Right
Tim
here.
Riggins. Yeah.
Texas
his character just felt so cliche to me. Everything he said was such bro culture, and maybe some of that is true, but it just, I don't know. I did like that he ended up not being this sort of villainous character the whole film, and they ended up becoming friends, him and Miles Teller. But that felt really cliche to me. A lot of the moments where they're bonding just felt like I've seen this a million times in every movie about a group of men. And then also something that I struggled with is even though I liked the scenes between Eric and his wife, the trope of the woman who's saying, "Don't go out and do the good thing. Come have a family with me."
I thought of
I've
you.
just seen
I
it
thought
so
of
many
you.
times.
I was like, I bet
so
Casey
many-
is gritting her
It's-
teeth. I swear to
It's
God.
just, it's the old Western trope. Like,
Yeah.
the hero wants to go out and save the rest of the world, and the woman says, "No, you have to stay here and be with the family." So I thought Jennifer Connelly was really great, and their conversations were great, but I wish that they could have, I don't know, cast that in a different way. Had the woman act in a different way.
Yeah, how about
or have
Andy
another character.
How about Andy McDowell with her 4 lines? She's like an established actress,
Yeah.
and they cast her to do 4 lines in Portie. I could not believe it. I was
And
like, man,
that line was, "It's not easy sharing your man with a fire."
that's right.
I heard it down.
Wow.
You wrote it down because it bothered you?
Yes.
Oh, that's really interesting. The reactions though seemed very keeping with what I would expect, right? If Lisa were doing something stupidly dangerous, I'd be like, this doesn't make sense. Like, we said that the marriage is a priority. You're taking such a huge risk every time. You're 90% hotshot. You're 10% in this relationship, and that's not enough for me. Like, that all felt real to me. And I felt like she was hitting him up on real things, right? Like, you've just traded one addiction for another, which is absolutely true to what he did. So I get what you're saying. I mean, being true to the film, like, because the very easy thing is to make, some percentage of the hot shots women, right? And so, but obviously that wasn't the real story. And so that gets tough. But that didn't hit me. But when you said that this film is run of the mill, I think was that they made generic choices. That's exactly how this felt for me. So before we go, do you guys have any parting shots?
Yeah. My parting shot is, I like doing this. It reminds me of book club, which I do. And one thing that I've always noticed with book club is we read a book. And if it's a book I was lukewarm on or I didn't like, we step away from it with some type of takeaway and a little bit of appreciation, even if I hated the book. And that has a lot to do with, I don't know, I guess the respect of the art. Like, I think of films, for example, the writer who sat and wrote this before the marketers got involved, before the studio got involved, before the director got involved. Whether it was a poorly written script or not, it was this person's art to sit there and write this. And I feel like when we do this, we're extracting those moments, those pieces of art, whether or not they got lost in the film. So I do enjoy doing that. So that's one thing. And the other thing for me, final shots, is the brotherhood and being a part of a team. It's one of the things I took away from this film. And I think it was you who had mentioned earlier that felt a little cliche, and it did. And we see it over and over again. But to me, it didn't feel cliche because I play soccer every Sunday with the same guys I've been playing with since 2001. And we don't know each other outside of soccer. Like, if I saw them at Costco, I'd be like, hey, I wouldn't know what to say. But on Sunday, there is a brotherhood. There is that feeling of being part of a team. You know what I mean? Same thing with coming to work and what we're doing here with Impact Theory. You mentioned it during the review the other day, that you want to get to a place that we've all have gone through the fire here. And it's not easy starting a company. It's not easy sticking it out before it gets great for everyone. But we're all going to be a team eventually. And you say this time and time again, you want us to look back and laugh at the hard road and appreciate what we did to get there. And that's what I took away from this film, the training. And anyone, if you talk to cops, firemen, especially people in the military who went through basic together, they're your brothers for life. They're your brothers or sisters, however you want to say it, or your teammates for life. So that was a huge takeaway for me. And I think with anyone who's in a business sense, it could be applicable to that. And I'm going to apply what I took away from this film to this company, Impact Theory.
Nice. There it is.
Beautiful.
Files.
I think the strongest thing I took away from the film is it really made me think about the real story and the real men who do this every day. And so that final act, it's funny, I kept thinking about it last night, what they did, what happened, and how I didn't really know the story until we saw the film. which I'm shocked by. And so even if I may have some qualms with how the film was put together, that message of knowing what they did and the bravery and the strength it took to do that, I think will sit with me for a long time. And even though at times I felt like the teamwork scenes felt cliche, I did still come away with like, wow, that brotherhood is so strong. Seeing Miles Teller reacting to the news was so heartbreaking. Just trying to imagine that being in a situation where your team is gone and just immediately is, I can't imagine that. So it ended up hitting me really deeply. By the end, I'll probably be thinking about it for a long time.
Well, all right, I'm going to make you guys rate this movie in 2 categories, and each category you have the option of 3 ratings: thumbs up, neutral, or thumbs down.
Okay.
All right, so you've got mindset and you've got the movie.
Okay.
So what do you give the mindset? What do you give the movie overall? Thumbs up, neutral, or down?
Mindset. Movie. 2 thumbs up. Siskel and Ebert.
Wow.
Nice. All right, this is interesting, and we may have to come up with a 3rd category or something because this is going to be slightly unrepresentative. Mindset, I'm going to give neutral. If you do the work, you'll get something out of it for sure, but they definitely didn't wear their mindset on their sleeve. Like The Matrix to me is like mindset thumbs up. Star Wars mindset thumbs up. It's really there. It's a part of it. It's what they want you to take away. So this one's neutral. It's good. If you put in the work, you're going to find it. And the movie, I'm gonna have to go thumbs down because I mean that from a cinematic standpoint. Like I would never rush out and tell somebody you have to go see Only the Brave. I don't, regardless of whether this is a true story, I think you always have the opportunity to make me feel something like Michael Mann in the way that he told the Ali story, where it was actually shot unlike digital when that wasn't a thing, but it made it feel so now, like of the moment. I was like, fuck, I'm here with Ali. Like I've gone back in time, which is exactly how it made it feel. Like I really felt teleported. True story. He's obligated to tell it in a real way, but he used what's available to him in the toolbox of cinema to tell that in such a compelling way. And I feel like these guys, to use your words, they made generic choices and ultimately it became run of the mill.
Ooh, decision time. Well, I'm going to agree with the neutral mindset. There, like you said, there's stuff there that you could mine from it, but I don't think it's going to stick with you as long as the themes we talked about in our prior review, Blade Runner. It was just sort of straightforward. There wasn't as much depth as I would have liked. And then for the movie, decisions. Can I say between neutral and thumbs down? Do I have to commit?
It's the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Because I appreciate so much the story being told, but the film itself, I guess if the category is film, the film itself was not by any means something that I would recommend everyone has to go see. Although the performances I thought were pretty great. So right. I don't know.
You only have 3 positions to choose from. Let's keep it hard.
Okay, then I'm just going to go neutral.
All right.
That's my final answer.
Guys, you heard it here first. So a bit of a mixed bag on this one, which is awesome. Gives you guys something to think about in terms of whether you want to go see this, what your own review is. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We're honored to have you in these early days as we really begin to nail down the format for the show. I'm sure all 3 of us have been thinking about things we want to do differently for the next one. So excited to keep evolving this with you. Tell us in the comments what you like, what you didn't like. All of that's very, very important. And if you have friends that are into film and mindset in movies as we call it, we just need a broader term. Maybe it'll be reels across everything. We'll see. But nonetheless, thank you for joining us for this episode of Real Impact. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care.